The Middle East is in constant turmoil. It has been exposed to failed policies and growing violence. Recently, the growing violence in the region has taken the Middle East to new dimensions of horror. In order to learn more about the Middle Eastern conflict, today we are joined by Dr. Mark Tomass from Harvard University. Thank you, Mr. Tomass, for being with us. So my first question to you is, the Middle East is in constant turmoil, and policies of the Western world tend to have a huge influence on the region. So how have the Western policies influenced the region and the Arab Spring?
Yeah, maybe we could make the question shorter and focus on the United States, because the West or Western countries don't have particular policies when it comes to the Middle East. They follow what the U.S. directs. So regarding the U.S. policy in the Middle East, the U.S. had a different interest in each of the countries where the Arab Spring uprising took place. So we would have to focus on these countries one by one. Generally, what happened in the Arab Spring uprisings, the central state was weakened because it was a bottom-up movement. So the central states were weakened. So the U.S. tried to figure out how it can fill in the vacuum of power that took place in a way that would promote its interests. So in an area closer to Turkey, let's discuss Syria. I think that would be the most relevant. In what sense the U.S. role has affected the Arab Spring uprising in Syria? Well, you have to first of all ask what are the U.S. interests in Syria, right? So the first generally what are the U.S. interests in the Middle East, and then what are they in Syria? Well, in the Middle East, the U.S. is interested in having a steady flow of oil. Basically, the energy market should be stable. No sharp increases in oil prices, and a steady flow of oil particularly to the Western countries. And the U.S. itself doesn't import oil from the Middle East, but it wants to see the oil market stabilized. So that is the reason why the U.S. has many U.S. bases in the Middle East. So the U.S. in principle supplies protection for the Middle Eastern countries with large deposits of oil in return for their security, for the securities of the monarchies and the emirates that produce this oil. And the second role of the United States the second interest of the United States to keep some balance in terms of geopolitics with Russia. It wants to have, if it can, it wants to have a permanent basis in the Middle East, apart from protecting its interest in the production of oil, but also in terms of not letting Russia expand further to the south. And the third most important role of the U.S. in the Middle East is ensuring that Israel is secure. So anything that threatens the security of Israel, the U.S. acts in a way that satisfies or comforts the security concerns of Israel. And that's how we want to see the U.S. intervention in Syria, both at the beginning in terms of supplying arms and logistics to the rebels, and later on in terms of its alliance with the Kurdish militias.
All right.
So what the impact was? The impact was basically it exacerbated the conflict. It exacerbated the Arab Spring uprising more by arming the rebels and increasing the death tolls, increasing the destruction.
All right. So, like you already mentioned, Russia. It is evident that the U.S. and Russia are trying to influence the region with their policies. However, they seem to have a different viewpoint. So how is this rivalry between the U.S. and Russia affecting the region?
Right. So if we try to, let's say, analyze the consequences of the Arab Spring uprising, assuming that there would be no foreign intervention, what would have happened is more or less we will have the same outcome, but with much less destruction, much less of deaths. What happened was the rivalries between the U.S. and Russia exacerbated the conflict, increased the death toll, increased the scale of destruction. Now, what are the interests? Now let's start with Russia. Russia's interest is entirely geopolitical. Russia is interested in its security as a state. Russia is very insecure in terms of its territorial integrity because it was invaded. It was invaded by the Mongols in the past. It was invaded by Napoleon, by the Germans, later on the Nazi Germans. So the Russians have this complex about protecting their own borders. So Russia didn't want the politicization of the situation, the way the political change was taking place in Syria to reach its borders, particularly the Islamic republics to the south of it. It did not want an Islamic regime to be taking over in Syria. And that's what it did. It stopped. It supported the regime, not because it particularly likes the regime, but because it wanted to stop the Islamization of Syria. Islamization, I mean the political Islamization of Syria. Syria is, by and large, a Muslim country. So that is from the Russian point of view. And the Syrian regime allowed Russia to come in because it needed its air support. So they were two bases. One is entirely an aerial base, and the other one was a port. The only port that is available for Russia outside its territories. Regarding the United States at the beginning it was supporting the rebellion in Syria through proxy, but now it is directly involved. As you know, it is occupying the eastern part of Syria, and Russia is practically managing the conflict on behalf of the Syrian regime in the western part of Syria, that is to the west of the Euphrates. So you have Syria divided into the Mesopotamian part under the U.S. control, in addition to two parts. One is Manbij, the other is in Raqqa and Al-Tabqa, near the Euphrates Dam, and the rest is under it's something similar to a Russian mandate over Syria. So what does that do to the conflict? Obviously, it is becoming a superpower conflict. So anything that happens in Syria is going to cater to the needs of these two powers. Of course, then we can talk about the role of Turkey. Maybe with if you want, we can talk about it now or later, how that complicates the situation.
All right. So, Professor, talking about Syria, the Syrian conflict has been ongoing for more than 7 years, and it seems like it's not going to end soon. So how do you see an end to the seemingly never-ending conflict?
There are two things. One is the way I would like it to end, and the other one taking, in other words, what my wishful thinking is, and the other one is what I think realistically will happen. Realistically speaking, Syrians have no control anymore over their destiny. You have the United States, you have Russia, and then you have Turkey, as we have recently seen. The three of them are in Syria. So what will happen, how the Syrian conflict will end, is going to depend on some sort of agreement among these three powers. Now, what I would like to see is, I would like to see eventually some sort of not autonomy, but some sort of local elections taking place, so that we have municipalities ruling their own regions. Now, I don't mean in terms of police, I don't mean in terms of state or in terms of army, but I mean more power should be given to the local authorities so that they could administer their affairs without having to deal with top-down power, which generally is corrupt and generally infringes on people's daily affairs. So I would like some sort of deal to be worked out where locals will have some power over their destiny. Now, how that can be done, that is a very complicated issue. So in the meanwhile, the question is how the superpowers, how Russia and the United States and the regional powers like Turkey, how will they see a successful resolution to their differences in Syria? So that is something we as Syrians cannot influence.
Moving more towards Israel and Palestine, about 2 months ago, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, made quite a controversial decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. the decision already received a lot of criticism from around the world. So what long-term consequences do you think this decision could bring to the region?
Well, it will place the United States more, it will place its position in the Muslim world more towards Israel than being viewed as a neutral power who can broker some sort of agreement between the Arabs and the Israelis. So, I mean, generally the populations in the Middle East, they already know that, but it's just this is one step further in that direction. It pushes the United States more firmly towards the Israelis. And I think that cannot have any positive impact on any future peace prospects. So on one hand, so it is hardening. In other words, it's hardening people's feelings but against the United States. But that is, I must admit, that is only on the grassroots level. It's not on the elite level. On the elite level, it could be quite the opposite. For example, you see there is a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and the Israeli authorities. And Jordan already has a peace treaty, has regular dealings with Israel. Egypt has. We've recently heard of deals with Israel selling gas to Egypt. So now that we add to that Saudi Arabia, we add to that the Emirates. So on the elite level, actually, things seem to be going in Israel's direction. But on the grassroots level, I would think this is a very bad move from the Trump administration because it makes people feel that, well, you know, there is no difference between Israel and the United States when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict.
All right.
So I don't see anything positive regarding any future peace deals regarding this particular move.
Thank you very much, Professor Tomass, for being with us, and we look forward to hosting you on our show again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jafar. Bye-bye.